Welcome everyone to another episode of Cybersecurity Weekly. I'm Fred Cobb, Executive Vice President of InfoSystems. I'll be your host today. And along with me is Chad Waddell, Senior Security Consultant, also at InfoSystems. Chad, we've been talking about the last couple of episodes, the Center for Internet Security, CSC baseline controls. I know we've covered, to date, we've covered hardware asset inventory, why that's important. We took that and carried it into software asset, which is control number 2. Now that we have a good feel for what type of hardware, what type of software that we have out there on our corporate networks, let's talk a little bit about continuous vulnerability management, since that is the CSC baseline control number 3.
Right.
And with the understanding that you kind of have to know what you have out there before you do vulnerability management to get the biggest bang and for your buck and have the most efficient type of vulnerability management program. So let's talk a little bit about why vulnerability management is important. Just what is it?
Okay.
Some of the tools that you can use to do continuous vulnerability management, or at least very frequent vulnerability management.
Yes.
So first off, why is it important to understand what vulnerabilities are out there in your environment?
Yeah, so, vulnerabilities is what's being exploited out there by the bad actors, by the malware, by the bots, all these different methods that we see, like phishing emails, bad websites, etc. Or even if somebody is in your environment, they're going to exploit those vulnerabilities in your systems. So vulnerabilities are a big concern because and when we talk about vulnerabilities, we're talking about like known vulnerabilities, so not like 0-day, for example. So these are known vulnerabilities that there are typically fixes or remediation or compensating controls that exist out there already. So if these are vulnerabilities already known, that means the bad actors know about it. Sure. It means that they're exploiting against it. And speaking on some of the items you were talking about, we have the asset inventory now from the first control. And then we have the software inventory for the second control. And ideally, you're going to go through that software and clean up your environment to where you're only running what's needed, the principle of least functionality. At that point, I love
that term, by the way.
Oh yeah, it's great, isn't it? Yeah. So then it's just you've got only what's needed, no more, no less. And once you get to that point, you can start doing vulnerability scanning against your systems. And the reason that's important is that at that point, you can really start tackling those vulnerabilities. If you started doing it before you cleaned up your systems, you'd be dealing with possibly hundreds or thousands of vulnerabilities. Okay.
Yeah, if you haven't already, I would encourage you to view our episode on patch management, because it sort of ties into what we're talking about today. If you think about the life cycle of an attack, okay, so you have a vulnerability, it becomes known. The first thing the bad guys are going to do, they're going to develop some sort of exploit to take advantage of that vulnerability. Then they have to, within the exploit kit, figure out a way to get the payload, get the bad software, whether it's malware, whether it's ransomware, into your environment. So policing your vulnerabilities, taking control of those vulnerabilities and doing appropriate patching or other appropriate security measures is paramount to stopping those bad actors sometimes right at the front door.
Yeah, because they're going after that. They're actively going after the big vulnerabilities that are out there, the new vulnerabilities. There's some that they'll use for years and years and years because no one's fixing them. No one's remediating those vulnerabilities. So, it's critical, absolutely.
Yeah. So, talk about, just briefly talk about why having software inventory, having an up-to-date list of software inventory, how can that either positively or negatively impact your vulnerability management?
Sure, yeah. So, prior to having a nice cleaned up one, it's just way too much to deal with. But once you chisel things down to what's absolutely needed and you start scanning your environment, it's going to give you a smaller subset to work with. And then when you scan against these systems, these vulnerability scanners are smart enough to tell what kind of vulnerabilities exist inside that environment. Some tools that you could use for that specifically is like Nessus is like the de facto standard out there. Tenable Nessus, yeah. There's some free open source software out there called OpenBoss. It's a little harder to get up and running and get going, and doesn't give you the same kind of insights as like Nessus, but it's still a pretty good tool. Nextpost, there's lots of different tools out there. But that's the goal, is that now you know what you have, now you know what software you have, and it's time to secure it.
We'll be back with the Cybersecurity Weekly podcast after we pause for this special message. Security analysts believe cyber attacks will continue to escalate throughout 2020 and are recommending that every company, regardless of industry or size, place immediate focus on cybersecurity training and the tools that will protect you from these attacks. Did you know that you can book a cybersecurity assessment right now with Fred Cobb's team of cybersecurity engineers at InfoSystems? They will help you discover exactly where you are most vulnerable to a cyber attack and make recommendations on how to strengthen your defense in those areas. This is urgent. It's an issue that affects everyone in our community. Visit the InfoSystems website at www.infosystems.biz to request your cybersecurity assessment. Now back to the podcast.
Yeah, in the future episode, we'll be talking about penetration testing.
Yeah.
And vulnerability assessments are really the precursor to doing a pen test. You have to understand what vulnerabilities exist out there and what the potential exploits might be. So we've got some tools out there, like you just mentioned, Tenable Nessus, Rapid Fire is another one that comes to mind for me. I know in some compliance, basically the frameworks for PCI, for HIPAA, for NIST, HIPAA is very vague on even if you need to, do some sort of vulnerability management, although they imply it.
Right.
In the case of PCI, those that take payment cards, anybody that takes payment cards for payment of services rendered or goods sold has to be payment card industry compliant. And depending on your level of payment card transactions, you have to do frequent vulnerability assessments and you have to do pen tests.
Right.
So very important to understand that as well. I don't necessarily agree with how frequent is.
Right, yeah.
Particularly around PCI. So, yes, we have to do a quarterly vulnerability
Right.
assessment.
Right.
That's 3 months.
Yeah.
We all know that
Yeah.
things are happening multiple times per
Yep.
day with zero threats, and new patches are being released to try to stay ahead, but you're always behind. You're always in that defensive posture.
Yeah.
So why is it important, I guess, to do more than the prescribed vulnerability assessments within some of these frameworks?
Yeah, so part of the reason why is because new vulnerabilities come out every day. So, these bad actors aren't going to wait till you scan and patch your systems or fix them or whatever. They're just not going to wait for that. Another piece that ties into that is the vulnerability scanning buys you some efficiency for that purpose, because there's no way you keep track of millions of potential vulnerabilities on your systems. And when the scanner is scanning your systems, it's seeing what kind of operating system is on it, what ports are open, what software is running, things like that. And then it's going to look at all the known vulnerabilities that are in there. If you had to go through, by a fine line, just go through every single vulnerability, that'd be impossible. So the scanners are cutting out a lot of the fat, a lot of the work for you. It's just super efficient. But once again, you're just taking care of the low-hanging fruit. That's the known stuff. That's the things that you should be taking care of now, but most organizations just simply aren't doing that.
Right. Yeah, it's a very important process to go through much more frequently than just every quarter or when you get around to it. The idea of continuous is doing this real high frequency, high velocity type of vulnerability. Let's talk for just a moment about the way vulnerabilities are typically scored. We've got the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS scoring.
Yep.
Can you speak to that for just a moment?
Yeah. So the CVSS is this standard of scoring. So you're taking qualitative type information and quantifying it. So you're saying, okay, this vulnerability exists, but what's the score for that? So it goes from like a 1 to 10, as far as 10 being critical and 1 being very low as far as criticality. So that's another important aspect, is like a new vulnerability comes out in the news, or you hear about it through keeping track of what's popping up, and there's a new critical vulnerability for some of your systems. You want to deal with that right away. You don't want to wait till, we're scanning on Wednesday. No, we need to start working on this now.
Absolutely.
But that's a good way. It helps you gauge it. So you're going to scan a system and you may have 30 vulnerabilities on there. And then you've got to decide, how do I prioritize these vulnerabilities? One way is through the CVSS score.
Right.
So there could be 20 of those could be a 5 or less. You could have, 10 of those are high and critical. And typically you do want to take care of those high and critical ones first. Now, some of those critical ones may pop up, and it may say the critical vulnerability is, this is Windows 7. It's end of life.
Yeah, what do you do there?
Yeah.
You upgrade the operating system.
Yeah, you upgrade. So it's like you have to replace, upgrade, whatever. That's a recommendation. Sometimes for mission critical systems that have to be up for long periods of time, you may not have the luxury just to patch that right away. You may have to schedule it, go through change control, whatever. So, and then there may be cases where if you if you try to fix a specific vulnerability, it could involve like a patch or something, and it could actually break how a certain system works, like an ICS system, for example, like industrial control system, and you may not be able to fix that, and that's where some like compensating controls would come into play.
Yeah, compensating control in that specific scenario might be a carbon black wrapper.
Yeah.
Or something, or application whitelisting.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if you can just disconnect it from a network.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be one way. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just to recap, vulnerability management should be an ongoing thing. It's not something you think about. Oh yeah, I haven't done a vulnerability scan in the last 2 years. Let me get on that.
Yeah.
That's
Don't wait.
That's not a good way to approach it. So having the tools in place. If you don't want to or don't have the technology available, don't understand the technology, the companies like Info Systems, we do vulnerability management programs where we'll come out and we'll configure the scanners, we'll run the vulnerability scans, we will interpret the results, we'll provide information based on order of criticality.
And help remediation.
With an understanding of the environment. What's critical to this environment based on a design may not be as critical to the company down the street.
Yeah.
So
different industries
take
too.
all of that into account, and business owners should be taking that into account too.
Right.
So again, we've been talking about the vulnerability or continuous vulnerability scanning control number 3, part of the Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls family. Highly encourage everyone that's listening out there to develop some sort of vulnerability scanning regiment if you haven't already done so. And you'll certainly benefit from that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So again, we appreciate you tuning in. It's great to have you joining in with us here at the Cybersecurity Talks, and we want to make sure we keep bringing timely, relevant, important information to you. So thank you again for tuning in. We will see you soon.
Thank you.